The hills of Odd, West Virginia have always carried a quiet weight, a kind of stillness that settles in and refuses to leave. Life there moves slower, shaped by habit, memory, and survival rather than schedules and deadlines. And in those hills sits a weathered house with peeling paint, a sagging porch, and decades of life pressed into its walls. Inside that house is Betty Whittaker, a woman who has endured more than most and who is now staring down a clock she never asked for. This time it isn't rumors. It isn't online drama. It isn't another wave of speculation from people far away. It's real. Betty has just 15 days left. The letter came without ceremony. No call. No knock at the door. Just a plain envelope slipped into the mailbox, folded and official, carrying words that changed everything. The notice was short and direct. There was no space for compassion, no acknowledgement of circumstance. The septic system violation remains unresolved. 15 days remain to correct the issue or vacate the property. 15 days. For someone with money, connections, or options, 15 days might be manageable. A rushed contractor. Alone. A temporary place to stay. But for Betty and Larry, 15 days is not a timeline. It's a cliff. When Brian arrived after hearing the news, he knew before he even parked that something had shifted. Betty was already on the porch, holding the paper like it might dissolve if she looked away too long. "They cut it in half," she said quietly. "I thought I had more time." Her hands trembled as she passed him the notice. Brian read it once. Then again. His jaw tightened. 15 days, he said under his breath. Behind her, Larry sat near the doorway in his recliner, staring out into the yard. Every so often he shook his head, muttering the same words over and over. "Ain't right. Ain't right." Betty didn't look at either of them. Her eyes stayed fixed on the hills in front of her, as if she was memorizing them. "This is all we got," she said. "If we lose this, we lose everything." The septic issue wasn't new. It had been there for years, hanging quietly in the background, ignored the way so many rural problems are ignored until someone decides they can't be anymore. The house was built long before modern codes mattered out here. No proper system. No easy access. No simple fix. And worse, the house sits on solid granite. There is no digging without machinery. No shortcuts. No cheap solution. Contractors who came out shook their heads before they even finished walking the property. One estimate after another landed on the table like a sentence. 7,000. 8,000. More. Money Betty has never seen in her life. "I don't even got $300, she said one afternoon, her voice flat. "What they want me to do with 15 days? Brian tried to explain it online, carefully choosing his words. "This ain't about neglect," he said. "This ain't about laziness. This house is sitting on rock. You can't just drop a tank in and call it done. You're talking heavy equipment, blasting, permits. And even if Betty had the money, you couldn't get it done in 15 days out here." The response was immediate. Anger, sympathy, offers of prayers and help. But 15 days doesn't stretch just because people care. An odd word traveled fast. Neighbors talked quietly. Some said the state was just enforcing the law. Others said the timing felt cruel beyond reason. "Why now?" one woman asked. "Why after everything they've already been through?" Inside the house, the mood shifted day by day. Betty stopped making full meals. The calendar on the wall became an enemy. Every morning she crossed out another number with shaky blue ink. 14 days, she whispered one morning. 13. Larry grew quieter. He slept more. When he spoke, it was usually the same sentence. "They don't care if we end up nowhere." Another state worker came by. Clipboard. Polite voice. Empty reassurance. "We're just checking on progress," he said. Betty didn't invite him in. "There ain't no progress," she said. "I told y'all I don't have the means." He nodded like he'd heard it all before. "The deadline still stands." She asked the question she already knew the answer to. "What happens if we can't fix it?" He hesitated. "Relocation procedures will begin." "To where?" she asked. "We'll cross that bridge when we get there." After he left, Betty sat down hard on the porch steps, the fight draining out of her all at once. "You ever notice," she said quietly to Brian later, How they always got a plan for what they're taking, but never one for where you're supposed to go? At night, the house felt heavier. The walls closed in. Every sound felt louder. Betty smoked more than she had in years, staring into the dark. "I've been strong my whole life," she said one night. "But I'm tired of proving it." Another envelope arrived. A contractor estimate. $7,850. She didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just stared. "Might as well be $1 million, she said. Online people argued. Should there be a fundraiser? Who would control it? What about past donations? What about Eric? Where did the money go before? None of it helped Betty count fewer days. Brian said it plainly. All that history don't fix a septic system. Betty needs help now. Not explanations. By day 10, the pressure was visible. Betty talked about leaving voluntarily just to avoid being forced. "Maybe I go stay somewhere for a bit," she said. "I don't want them dragging us out." Brian pushed back gently. "You shouldn't have to disappear to make this easier for them." She smiled sadly. "People like us always do." Local media started asking questions. The county repeated the same line. Environmental health standards must be upheld. When Betty heard that, she laughed bitterly. "How healthy you think I'll be sleeping in a car?" 15 days became 10. 10 became 8. Each morning felt like waking up already late. The internet buzzed louder, but solutions stayed just out of reach. Paperwork, waiting lists, programs that took months, not days. And through it all, Betty stayed where she'd always been. On her porch. In her home. Refusing to leave quietly. "They might take the house," she said. "But they ain't taking me without a fight." 15 days. And the clock is still ticking. The morning after Betty crossed off another day on the calendar, the house felt smaller. Not physically smaller, but heavier, as if the walls themselves were counting down alongside her. 10 days were gone. 5 remained. Every sound carried weight now. The hum of the refrigerator. The creak of the porch boards. Even the wind moving through the trees felt like a reminder that time does not stop for anyone, especially not for people with nothing left to give. Betty woke up before the sun, the way she had for most of her life. Old habits don't fade just because fear takes their place. She made coffee with shaking hands, poured it into the same chipped mug she'd used for years, and sat at the table staring at the contractor estimate like it might somehow change overnight. $7,850. She didn't bother rounding it anymore. The number had burned itself into her mind. Larry shuffled into the kitchen not long after, his steps slow and uneven. He didn't ask what day it was. He already knew. The calendar was impossible to ignore now, marked in thick blue excess like warning signs. "How many left?" he asked quietly. 5, she said. He nodded and lowered himself into the chair, rubbing his hands together like he was trying to warm them, even though the house wasn't cold. "They ain't even trying to work with us," he muttered. Betty didn't respond. She didn't trust her voice anymore. Later that morning, Brian arrived again. He didn't knock. He never did anymore. He just called out softly from the yard before stepping onto the porch. Betty was already sitting outside, bundled in a sweater, watching the gravel road like she was expecting something to come up it. "You didn't sleep," Brian said. She shrugged. "What's sleep gonna do?" He sat beside her, careful not to crowd her space. He didn't pull out his camera. He hadn't been filming much lately. Not because the story wasn't important, but because Betty didn't feel like a story anymore. She felt like a person running out of ground beneath her feet. "I made more calls," he said. "County office. A rural assistance program. Even a church group in Beckley." "And," she asked, "they all say the same thing. Applications take weeks. Inspections take time. Nobody moves fast enough for 5 days." She let out a short, humorless laugh. "Figures." Brian hesitated. "There is one thing." She looked at him then. "There's talk online about starting a fundraiser again. People are asking. But you know how that goes. People don't trust it anymore. Too much happened before. Her jaw tightened. I ain't asking strangers for nothing, she said. Not again. I know, he replied gently. I just wanted you to hear it from me, not the internet. By noon, another state worker arrived. Different face. Same clipboard. Same polite distance. Miss Whittaker, she said, glancing around. We're following up. Betty didn't invite her onto the porch this time. I told y'all everything already, she said. Nothing's changed. The woman nodded, scribbling something down. We understand this is stressful. Do you? Betty shot back. Because it don't feel like it. The worker cleared her throat. If there's no proof of a signed contract or deposit by the deadline, the relocation process will proceed. Relocation, Betty repeated. Like this is a vacation. We'll discuss placement options when the time comes. When the time comes? Betty echoed. You mean when the clock runs out? The woman didn't answer that. She just nodded again and walked back to her car. After she left, Betty's shoulders sagged like she'd been holding herself upright on pure stubbornness alone. They talk like we're boxes, she said. Just move us somewhere else. Brian clenched his jaw. You're not boxes. That ain't how they see it. That afternoon the internet got louder. Clips were shared. Posts were made. People argued in comment sections about responsibility, about land ownership, about who failed who first. Some blamed the state. Some blamed past helpers. Some blamed Betty herself for living the way she had for decades. She didn't see most of it. Brian shielded her from what he could. But bits slipped through. Why didn't they fix it earlier? Where did all the donation money go? This is why you don't get involved with people like that. Betty heard enough. People always got answers when it ain't their life, she said quietly. On day 4, a local pastor stopped by with a bag of groceries. No camera. No speech. Just a soft prayer on the porch and a promise to check back in. I wish prayer fixed pipes, Betty said after he left. Brian smiled sadly. Me too. That night, Betty packed a small bag. Not because she planned to leave, but because the thought of being forced to without anything ready terrified her more than the idea of going. She folded clothes slowly, placed them carefully. Her movements were methodical, like she was preparing for something she refused to accept. Larry watched from the bed. You leaving me? He asked, half joking, half afraid. She stopped and looked at him. Don't you ever say that. I ain't going nowhere, he said. They gonna have to drag me. She nodded, swallowing hard. I know. Day 3 came with rain. A steady drizzle that soaked the yard and made the hills look darker, heavier. This figures, Betty muttered. Even the sky knows. Brian showed up again, soaked through, carrying a folded piece of paper. I talked to a contractor, he said. He can't do the work in time, but he wrote a letter stating the difficulty. Sometimes that helps buy time. Time for what? She asked. For the system to maybe slow down, he said, though he didn't sound convinced. She took the paper and read it slowly. Her hands shook again. This don't fix nothing, she said. No, he admitted. But it might show effort. Effort. She had spent her entire life making effort. That night, Betty sat alone on the porch long after everyone else had gone. She stared at the hills, the same hills she had watched through good years and bad, through laughter and loss. I raised my family here, she whispered to no one. I buried people from here. I survived things people don't even know about. The house creaked behind her like it was listening. Day 2 arrived without mercy. The calendar looked wrong now, like it had made a mistake. 2 days left. A reporter called Brian asking for a comment. He declined. Not because the story wasn't important, but because Betty didn't need more strangers dissecting her life. She needs help, he told them. Not headlines. That afternoon, Betty snapped. I'm tired, she said, her voice breaking. I'm tired of begging. I'm tired of fighting. I'm tired of being strong just so the world can keep pushing. Brian didn't interrupt. He let her cry. Let the anger come out. They act like I chose this, she said. Like I wanted to live this way. Like being poor is a crime. She wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater. I didn't fail this house. This house kept me alive. On the final evening before the last full day, Betty sat at the kitchen table with the calendar in front of her. One square left uncrossed. Tomorrow. She took the marker and stared at it for a long time. I ain't crossing it yet, she said. It ain't over. Brian nodded. No, it's not. The clock kept ticking. The system kept moving. And Betty Whittaker remained exactly where she had always been, holding on as long as she could. What happens next will change everything. Tell me what you think. Do you believe the state should give Betty more time, or is this another case where the system has already decided her fate? Leave your thoughts in the comments. The last full day before the deadline arrived without ceremony. No sirens. No official knock at the door. Just the same pale light creeping through the curtains like it had every morning before it. But this time it felt final. Betty woke up sitting upright in her chair, the calendar still on the table where she'd left it the night before. One square left. She didn't reach for the marker. She just stared at it, letting the weight of that single box press down on her chest. Larry was already awake too. He hadn't slept much either. They didn't talk at first. There wasn't anything left to say that hadn't already been said 100 times in the past 2 weeks. Finally, Betty broke the silence. Today's the day they decide if we're allowed to exist here anymore. Larry nodded slowly. Feels like we already know. Brian arrived just after 9. He looked exhausted, like someone who had been carrying a load that wasn't his but refused to put it down anyway. He stepped onto the porch and stopped when he saw Betty sitting there. You okay? He asked, though the question felt almost cruel. She smiled faintly. I'm still here. They sat together in silence for a long moment. The hills were quiet. No birds. No wind. Just stillness. I talked to someone last night, Brian said carefully. A county advocate. Not official. Off the record. Betty didn't look hopeful. And? They said once relocation paperwork starts, it moves fast. Real fast. Especially when there's already a record. Her jaw tightened. So this was decided before I even got the letter. Brian didn't contradict her. Around midday the internet erupted again. Someone leaked a screenshot. Someone else posted a rumor. A few channels went live with bold titles and dramatic thumbnails. Some claimed Betty was being evicted immediately. Others said the notice had been extended quietly. Nobody knew the truth and everyone spoke like they did. Betty didn't watch any of it. I ain't entertainment, she said. I'm tired of being somebody else's content. A van pulled up the gravel road just after lunch. Not the state. Not a contractor. A woman in her 40s stepped out, holding a clipboard and wearing a jacket with a small nonprofit logo on it. I'm here to talk, she said. Not inspect. Betty crossed her arms. About what? Options, the woman replied gently. They talked on the porch. No cameras. No paperwork signed. Just words. Temporary housing. Emergency placement. Assisted living. Shelters. Each option sounded worse than the last. I ain't going to no shelter, Betty said firmly. I ain't sleeping in a room full of strangers. The woman nodded. I understand. I just need you to know what's available. And what ain't? Betty asked. The woman hesitated. Staying here. After she left, Betty didn't cry. She didn't yell. She just went inside and sat on the edge of the bed like someone who had reached the end of a road they never chose to walk. I feel like I'm already gone, she said quietly. Larry reached for her hand. You still with me? For now, she replied. That evening, Brian posted a short update. No dramatics. No accusations. Tomorrow is the deadline, he said plainly. No extension has been confirmed. Betty and Larry are still in the home tonight. That's all I can say. The comments exploded. This is heartbreaking. How can we help right now? Someone step in. This is why the system is broken. One message stood out. It was simple. If they force her out, that's on all of us. Brian read it twice before closing his laptop. That night, Betty walked through the house slowly. She touched the wall near the doorway. The old table. The window she used to watch storms roll in. Every object carried memory. I don't remember a time I wasn't here, she whispered. Even when I left, I came back. She sat on the porch one last time before bed. The hills were dark but familiar. I tried, she said aloud. I really did. Morning came too soon. The sound of tires on gravel broke the silence just after 8. Not one vehicle. Two. Betty stood up slowly. This is it, she said. Brian arrived at the same time, breathless. No official order yet, he said quickly. Just talk first. 2 county workers stepped out. Calm, polite, prepared. Miss Whittaker, one said. We need to discuss next steps. Steps to where? Betty asked. Inside the house they talked. Long sentences filled with policy language and softened phrases. Due to non-compliance. For safety reasons. Temporary relocation. Betty listened, but it all blurred together. So you're taking my house, she said finally. We're requiring you to vacate the property, the man corrected. That's taking it, she said flatly. They gave her time. Not days. Hours. You can collect personal belongings, the woman said. We'll assist with transport. Betty looked around the room. How much is personal? She asked. No one answered. Larry grew agitated. This ain't right, he repeated over and over. This ain't right. Brian stepped in gently, trying to calm him. I don't want to go, Betty said suddenly, her voice louder than she intended. I don't consent to. No one brought a miracle. Betty packed what she could. Clothes. A few photos. A Bible with worn pages. She stood in the doorway one last time and turned back. I didn't fail you, she whispered to the house. They failed us. As she stepped onto the porch, her knees nearly buckled. Brian caught her arm. I got you, he said. She nodded, unable to speak. The vehicles waited. As Betty was helped inside, the hills stood unchanged. Silent witnesses. No sirens. No drama. Just a woman leaving the only place she had ever known as home. And the internet watched. Some cheered intervention. Some cried injustice. Some scrolled past. But for Betty Whittaker, the countdown was over. Not with relief. With loss. This isn't the end of the story. What comes next may matter even more than what was taken today. Tell me what you think. Was this necessary protection, or a system that waited too long and acted too hard? Share your thoughts in the comments. The first night away from the house didn't feel real to Betty. The room she was placed in was clean, quiet, and unfamiliar. White walls. A narrow bed. A window that faced a parking lot instead of the hills. She sat on the edge of the mattress long after the staff member left, hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor like she was waiting for someone to tell her it had all been a mistake. Larry paced. He kept asking the same questions. When do we go home? Who's got the keys? What about the porch? No one had answers that made sense to him. Betty tried to be strong for him the way she always had, but something inside her had cracked. Not loudly. Quietly. The kind of break that doesn't scream, just drains. They took it, she whispered to herself. They really took it. The next morning came with paperwork. Forms. Signatures. Explanations that felt rehearsed. Temporary placement. Evaluations. Future planning. The words stacked on top of each other until they stopped sounding like English. Betty signed where they pointed. Not because she agreed. Because she was tired. Brian arrived later that day. He wasn't allowed into the room at first. Policies. Procedures. Eventually, they let him sit with her in a small common area. He didn't bring a camera. I'm sorry, he said quietly. She looked at him, eyes glassy but dry. I know you tried. I should have done more. She shook her head. This was bigger than you. Bigger than me. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said something that stopped him cold. They didn't just take my house. They took my job. Brian frowned. Your job. My purpose, she corrected. I took care of everybody. That's what I did. Now who am I? That question didn't have a place on any form. Outside, the internet was doing what it always did when a story reached its peak and turned uncomfortable. Some people celebrated. She's safer now. This was necessary. The state did the right thing. Others were furious. They destroyed her. She needed help, not removal. This is cruelty dressed as care. Comment sections turned into battlegrounds. Videos broke records. Reaction channels dissected every frame of old footage, every word Betty had ever said, every mistake she'd ever made. But Betty wasn't watching. She was learning how to exist in a place where no one needed her to boil water, stack wood, or keep track of who had eaten. The days blurred together. Larry struggled more than she did. He became withdrawn, then agitated. He asked to leave constantly. He didn't understand why he couldn't walk outside when he wanted or why the doors locked automatically. Betty sat with him as much as she could. "It's just for now," she kept saying even when she no longer believed it. At night she dreamed of the house. Not as it was at the end, but as it had been years ago. Laughter. Movement. Familiar chaos. She woke up reaching for sounds that weren't there. A week passed. Then two. Brian continued updating the public carefully now. No accusations. No speculation. Just facts when he had them. "Betty is safe," he said in one video. But safe doesn't always mean okay. Behind the scenes, meetings were happening. Evaluations. Guardianship discussions. Long-term placement possibilities. Words like return were no longer used. The septic issue became irrelevant overnight. The house sat empty. A neighbor drove up the hill one afternoon out of habit and stopped short when she saw the door padlocked. The porch bare. No chair. No movement. "It feels wrong," she said later. Like a heartbeat stopped. Rumors spread that the landowner was already talking to someone else. That the house might be condemned. That it might be torn down. Betty hadn't been told any of that. She found out the way she'd found out about everything else. Through whispers. "I heard they might tear it down," a staff member said gently one day, not realizing the weight of the words. Betty didn't respond. That night, she cried for the first time since leaving. Not loud. Just quiet tears soaking into the pillow. "I didn't even get to say goodbye right," she whispered. Larry slept through it. The public interest began to fade as it always does. New stories took over. New outrage. New victims. The Whittaker name stopped trending. But the damage didn't stop just because the cameras moved on. Betty changed. She became smaller somehow. Less talkative. Less animated. The woman who once held an entire family together now struggled to hold herself upright some days. A counselor asked her how she felt about the intervention. Betty thought for a long time. "Like I was judged without being heard," she finally said. "Like my whole life was reduced to a checklist." Another asked her what she wanted now. She answered without hesitation. To go home. When told that wasn't likely, she nodded slowly. "Then I want people to stop pretending this was kindness." That sentence never made it into any report. Larry's condition worsened. His confusion deepened. He stopped asking about the house eventually. That hurt more than the questions. Because it meant something inside him had let go. One afternoon, Brian brought printed photos. Old ones. The porch. The hills. The yard in late summer light. Betty traced the edges with her fingers. "Thank you," she said. "I was afraid I'd forget." "You won't," he replied. "I already am," she whispered. The question everyone kept asking online was simple. Was it worth it? There was no simple answer. The house was unsafe. That was true. The conditions were bad. That was true. But the way it ended mattered. And for Betty, the ending felt like punishment for surviving too long without resources. A retired nurse who visited occasionally put it best. She needed support years ago. Not removal at the finish line. As weeks turned into months, Betty adjusted on the surface. She followed routines. Ate meals. Took walks when allowed. But something essential never returned. The sense of ownership over her own life. She had become someone else's responsibility. Someone else's case. Someone else's decision. And that loss didn't show up on any safety report. One evening, Brian asked her if she wanted him to keep telling her story. She looked at him carefully. "Only if you tell it all," she said. "Not just the parts that make people feel right." "What do you want people to know?" he asked. She thought for a long time. That being poor isn't a crime. That loving your family doesn't always look neat. And that sometimes the system waits until it's too late to help the right way. Outside, the hills of Odd were quiet again. Just like before the world came. Just like after it left. The house still stood, empty and silent. A symbol to some. A wound to others. For Betty Whittaker, it was simply home. And losing it changed everything. Now it's your turn. Do you believe this intervention protected Betty, or did it come too late and cost her everything that mattered? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this video. Click here to watch another video that might interest you.